My name is William Daughtry. I'm the head of school here at Montgomery Bell Academy, and it's my true joy to welcome you tonight to the Trinity Forum conversation with Michael Lamb. And it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Trinity Forum board member Sam Funk, who will officially kick off what I believe is our first event entering the second decade of this partnership that we value so much with Trinity Forum and St. Paul Christian Academy. So welcome.
Thank you, William. Well, welcome. Tonight is our sold-out evening conversation on the courage to teach character with Michael Lamb. As William mentioned, my name's Sam Funk. I live here in Nashville. I've been involved with the Trinity Forum about 20 years now. I've been on the board for the last 6 years. And Trinity is obviously near and dear to my heart and to my family's heart. For those of you who have been here before, and I see a lot of familiar faces, you're probably asking yourself, where is Cherie Harder? She is much more articulate than I am, much more intelligent, and unfortunately, she's much more sick than I am. So she could not make the trip from D.C. She sends her regrets, but as she said, she's literally sick about not being here. So tonight's event is the result of a partnership, and as William suggested, it's really a 10-year partnership between Trinity Forum, St. Paul, and MBA. And we really couldn't do this without that partnership. It's been great. We've had lots of wonderful speakers in town. We do this about twice a year, and it's just a phenomenal thing. And really, it's due to a large part to these partners that we have. So I definitely want to thank each of them. Also, I want to recognize our sponsors tonight and the Friends of Trinity Forum, Lee and Mary Barfield, Janet and David Chestnut, Joe and Ashley Cook, Jessica and Kevin Douglas, Alan and Gretchen Horner, Eleanor and Eric Osborne, Ed and Molly Powell, Giff and Anna Thornton, Chris and Eleanor Wells. I also want to thank three foundations, the Charis Foundation, the Creed and Culture Fund, and the Andrea Waite Carlton Foundation. This is also a bit odd. I'm supposed to thank my law firm for being a corporate sponsor. Take that with a grain of salt. All right. For those of you who are new to Trinity, our mission is to cultivate, curate, and disseminate the best of Christian thought leadership. And what we want to do is provide a place for leaders to wrestle with the big questions of the day, but to do that in the context of faith, to do that, to come to better know the author of the answers. And we hope tonight's discussion will offer just a small taste of that for you. Now, turning to tonight's topic of character, while Michael is here, we only need to look at the TV, look at the news, listen to the radio to find out that how important character and character education can be. At a time when more people, especially young people, report struggling with loneliness, lack of purpose, hopelessness. When the primary social media communication encourages snarking and scapegoating and envy and fear. When consensus about what is good and what is right, and even what is real and true, are up for debate. When moral confusion and conspiracy have led to shocking anti-Semitism. It seems fair to say that we need to teach and cultivate character. And it's particularly urgent at this point in our world. But the deep division and moral confusion surrounding that really make teaching character all the more difficult, even though it's all the more important right now. It takes courage and it takes commitment, and that's what we see from Michael Lamb. Our speaker tonight has tackled these questions not only with scholarly brilliance, but with courage, deep care for his colleagues and students. And by the way, as to the last point, Michael's care for his students, I must say, our oldest daughter, Mary Caroline Funk, is a recent graduate of Wake Forest. She also happened to be a student of Michael Lamb. And so I know firsthand that he has deep care for his students. And I will say our Mary Caroline gives him very, very high marks and holds him in very high regard. So Michael Lamb is the F.M. Kirby Foundation Chair of Leadership and Character. He's the Executive Director of the Program for Leadership and Character. and he's the Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Humanities at Wake Forest University. He is also a research fellow with the Oxford Character Project. He is the author of A Commonwealth of Hope, Augustine's Political Thought. Great book, if I can recommend that to you. It just came out. He's the co-editor of Cultivating Virtue in the University and Everyday Ethics, Moral Theology and the Practices of Ordinary Life. Michael holds a PhD in politics from Princeton, a BA in political science from Rhodes College, a BA in philosophy and theology from the University of Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. Michael also serves as the principal investigator on a $30 million grant from the Lilly Endowment, and that is to build capacity for other colleges. In other words, he's tasked with helping other universities and colleges do what he's doing at Wake Forest right now. Lastly, Michael is a native Tennessean. He grew up not far from here in Chapel Hill, Tennessee, and we are particularly honored tonight that his parents, Ken and Angela Lamb, could be here with us tonight. So with that, Michael, welcome.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that very generous introduction, and for all you and Betsy do to support the Trinity Forum. It's really a wonderful organization here, and I want to thank Cherie, even though she's not here, and the wonderful team at Trinity Forum for a really amazing evening tonight, and for all you all do to really elevate the importance of character in public life. I want to thank Dr. Daltrey and Montgomery Bell Academy for hosting us in this beautiful space here, Will Norton and St. Paul Christian Academy for being a partner in tonight's event, and for our several co-sponsors who Sam mentioned for making this event possible. I'm very grateful to be back here in my home region to think about and talk about character. I also want to thank all of you for being here tonight. As Sam mentioned, I grew about 40 miles south on Nolensville Road, just on a small farm in Chapel Hill, Tennessee. And I see several friends in the audience, so thank you all for being here. And my parents, Ken and Angela Lamb, who I think fittingly tonight did more than anyone to teach me about character. Dad taught me how to work and sacrifice. I saw him every day after a long day working at Nissan in Smyrna, building engines for Nissan trucks, come home, change his boots, and go back out again for several hours on the farm, all to support our family. And he still made time somehow to coach our Little League teams and serve on the school board and lead our local Lions Club. Mom taught me how to love and serve. She's the one in our community who was always going around helping families at Christmas or pouring out her love with kids at school when she worked there. You go to the store with Mom and everybody be yelling, "Miss Lamb," because kids would want to come and hug her because she was so beloved by students she worked with. She also taught those values to us. So her very first words to me, my baby book, a letter she wrote and then sent me when I was in college before a big interview, was this: "Dear Michael, hope you become a kind person, a compassionate and forgiving person, one who helps those who are less fortunate than yourself." That was her vision for my life from our very first day on this planet. So I think if you don't know why I love character so much, it really is Mom and Dad who made that possible. So thank you all for being here. In his 1837 address to Phi Beta Kappa at Harvard College, Ralph Waldo Emerson lifted up the importance of character in education. Education, he said, should aim not at creating mere bookworms, but inspiring thinkers who know how to live. And living, he said, was the point. Quote, "Character is higher than intellect. A great soul will be strong to live as well as strong to think." Over a century later, in 1947, in his college newspaper at Morehouse College in Atlanta, the young Martin Luther King Jr. advanced a similar vision of education. "The function of education," he wrote, quote, "is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals." He pointed then to the former governor of Georgia, the segregationist Eugene Talmadge, and pointed out he actually wore the Phi Beta Kappa key as a mark of his intelligence, but he saw King and his colleagues there as inferior because of the color of their skin. So King concluded, quote, "Intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education." In emphasizing character as part of true education, Emerson and King point to the intellectual and moral habits, the virtues of character that dispose us to think, feel, and act for the right reasons and in the right ways. In commending these virtues, they echo a long tradition of elevating character as a central purpose of education, a tradition that is alive and well at St. Paul and Montgomery Bell Academy. St. Paul seeks to support students in what they describe as their, quote, critical character-forming years of adolescence, equipping leaders with, quote, a solid understanding of the greater purpose of life in a way that builds character foundations for years to come. And as MBA says in its view book, they see character as, quote, the foundation for all our students' academic, altruistic, and athletic pursuits, recommending virtues like resilience, perseverance, humility, and empathy as fundamental for flourishing. Wake Forest University, where I am now, stands within this great tradition of education. Wake Forest was founded in 1834, just 3 years before Emerson's speech at Harvard, for students, quote, of good character. So it's part of our institutional DNA to do this work at Wake Forest. Inspired by our motto, Pro Humanitate, which means for humanity, we strive to educate leaders of character to cultivate humanity within themselves, to then serve humanity beyond themselves. And we have a program, as Sam mentioned, for leadership and character, which I direct, that employs creative teaching, innovative programming, and cutting-edge research to help infuse character across our entire student body and even among our faculty and staff. And now, thanks to a $30 million grant from Lilly, which Sam mentioned, we've now begun the Educating Character Initiative to help build a national movement and community to think about ways we can help colleges and universities beyond Wake Forest educate character in their own context. So we're very excited about this. It launched 2 weeks ago, so we're very delighted to have that out there now in the world. There's a growing interest in the work around character across all levels of education. Yet, despite this growing interest, these efforts to do this work remain largely countercultural. Many are skeptical of integrating character into the mission of an academic institution, especially given the diversity of American life. Even those who do desire to educate character often don't know how. Most teachers do not receive formal training in character education when they go through their graduate programs. And given increasing demands on them and their time, they don't have the ability to learn a new field either. So it can be difficult, at times dangerous, and even scary to teach character when we don't know how to do it, when others are skeptical, and when the stakes for our students and for our society are so very high. So we need the virtue of courage, that virtue that requires us and helps us respond to fear and difficulty in the right ways and for the right reasons. Courage, you may know, is one of the 4 cardinal virtues in the tradition of thinking about what the virtues are, and among the most important, as the late Wake Forest professor and poet Maya Angelou said, quote, without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. Nor, I'd add, could you teach it very well either. Importantly, the virtue of courage is not the absence of fear, but the right response to it. This is very important. It's not the absence of fear, but the right response to fear. That means that courage avoids vices like cowardice, which is the lack of courage, but also vices such as rashness or recklessness, which are maybe an excess of courage. Those vices fail to acknowledge legitimate fears we might have that are actually worthy of our concern and attention. Many fears that skeptics raise about character are actually legitimate fears and require us to proceed not rashly, but cautiously, critically, and intentionally, with a humble awareness of our limits, a fierce commitment to welcome diverse voices, backgrounds, and experiences, and a bold aspiration to create conditions that facilitate this difficult, but I would argue, vital work. So I'm happy to say more about those challenges in the Q&A if you'd like, but I want to spend tonight first thinking about 7 reasons why I think character education matters for our students and also for us. So I hope these reasons might bolster our collective courage to teach it in our schools and even in our own households and companies. So why character? Why focus on teaching character in our organizations and our schools? Well, first, it's the right thing to do. Virtue is good for its own sake. It is right and good to be just and compassionate and kind, and therefore to help our students develop those very same virtues and others too. But not everyone will agree that virtue has intrinsic value. So we might appeal to a second and related reason to teach character. Good character can promote human flourishing. In the classical approach that MBA and St. Paul share, virtues enable human beings to flourish, both as individuals and also as communities. The Greek word for virtue, arete, also means excellence. Virtues are excellences of thought, feeling, and action that enable human beings to be excellent beings of our kind, to do distinctly human things, make judgments, face fears, regulate desires, build relationships in morally excellent ways. Virtues are excellences of our own character. And this connection between character and excellence and flourishing then is very important. It's common to ancient philosophy, but also now it's been supported by empirical evidence. Across various studies across continents, the Harvard Flourishing Program has shown that character and virtue are one of 5 key domains of human well-being and flourishing across various cultures and continents. It's a very important finding that they've made in the last few years. And so this contribution to flourishing is very important, especially given what Sam mentioned about the ways in which many of our youth are really in serious crisis now of mental health and of loneliness, which he mentioned, as studies show, which are very significant. One study attributes these challenges to a lack of meaning and purpose in life, increased pressures to achieve. We all know about some of those pressures in this room, and a dearth of meaningful relationships. In the face of these challenges, attain to character, to the higher purposes that give meaning to our lives, to the friendships that support them, and to virtues like resilience, courage, hope that sustain them. This can help us resist and reform the achievement culture that we know so well, that makes the sirens of prestige, of status, of success so seductive in our world. Virtue is a more secure foundation for flourishing. Yet even if virtue calls us to a higher standard of excellence, it need not endanger performance, but can actually enhance it, even in the classroom. This is a third reason to educate character. It promotes academic excellence and integrity. The primary purpose of education, as we all know, is to help students develop the knowledge, skills, and capacities to understand, analyze, influence, and engage the world. To achieve this mission, students need certain intellectual virtues: curiosity, creativity, open-mindedness, wisdom, to name a few. Yet as Emerson and King emphasize, intellectual virtues, while necessary, are not sufficient to ensure academic excellence and integrity. This is why many schools, such as MBA and Wake Forest, have honor codes that prohibit lying, cheating, and stealing and promote academic integrity. But if we want students not just to comply with these codes, to follow the rules, but to actually become people of honor and integrity, they need the moral virtues. They need justice and honesty, to cite their sources properly, to represent their work honestly and accurately, to give others credit where it is due. They need empathy to inhabit others' perspectives, and humility to recognize the limits of their own, courage to say what they believe, even when it's unpopular, and resilience to learn from their mistakes and respond well to adversity. These virtues can encourage academic excellence and integrity. Fourth, good character can also support professional performance and career preparation. For one, character is important to employers. Prominent leaders such as Warren Buffett have said, for example, that we should hire for integrity first. For those of you who might lead corporations or organizations or schools, you might also agree with that advice. One study found that 81% of U.S. employers ranked ethical judgment and decision-making as very important when hiring new employees. It was third behind communication and teamwork. That's pretty important. We value character not simply because it helps us create a positive work culture, but also because it actually contributes to the bottom line. In one book, Return on Character, Fred Kiel has shown that companies that value character actually do better financially over the long run than those that do not. This is why there's now a Return on Character fund that you can invest in that will channel your stocks and your investments to companies led by high character CEOs. They actually produce better results on the market. And character is important not only to business, but to other professions. As we've seen at Wake Forest, we've actually done work with professions there, including engineering, law, medicine, and the ministry. And research shows that in these fields and across other fields, that good character makes good professionals. If trust is the currency of leadership, and character is a core component of trust, as it is alongside competence, then character can be supportive of our professional leadership and career advancement. And maybe even more important in a time when we're seeing so many advances in technology now that's changing our world in ways we can't even predict yet. We need good character, for example, to design and use AI ethically. It's also important to distinguish us human beings from robots who might take some of our jobs in some dystopian scenarios that aren't quite dystopian anymore. We see this happening a lot in different sectors, actually outsourcing jobs to robots and AI. But robots haven't yet been programmed to make wise decisions in the face of moral complexity, or to show genuine compassion, real compassion in the face of suffering. Human beings can bring those virtues to this world. And even if they are programmed in some future, it'll be human beings who program them to do those things. So we need human beings actually of good character, helping design and create our technology in ways that we can use it responsibly and with wisdom and care. So fifth, in addition to academic and professional preparation and advancement, character can support just, equitable, and inclusive community. Given increased awareness of systematic injustices across a variety of dimensions, many institutions of education have rightly focused on increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Much more work needs to be done on those areas, but character, I think, when done well, can support these urgent efforts. If we hope to move beyond a mere compliance or checklist approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually change hearts, minds, and cultures, virtues of character can play a vital role in that work. We need, for example, humility and empathy to recognize the limits of our perspectives and be open to learning from those who are different from us. Courage and honesty to challenge unjust structures and recognize our own complicity, perhaps, in injustice. Resilience to persevere in this work in the face of many obstacles. And justice itself, to treat others fairly, offer the respect and recognition they are due, and reform institutions to be more equitable and inclusive. And if character education can support DEI work in our context, DEI can also help to inform and support character education, challenging us to avoid narrow and exclusive visions of what character might be, and to adapt more sensitive practices that recognize how diverse circumstances, structures, and experiences shape us, and how the exercise of certain virtues might look different among people with different identities and backgrounds. Good character can help diverse communities flourish. This work is especially important given our current political divisions, which points to a sixth reason to educate character. It can make us better leaders and citizens. Across multiple sectors, including in public life, recent scandals have shown a crisis of leadership and character. As Sam mentioned, we don't have to look very far to see examples of bad leaders among very prominent public figures. So now, as much as ever, we need leaders and citizens who embody good character, especially in a democracy where we, the people, where all of us, are required to govern and choose our leaders. We must also have good character to choose the right people to lead and govern us. America's founders recognized this. In his farewell address, George Washington described virtue or morality, quote, as a necessary spring of popular government. John Adams said, quote, the preservation of liberty depends upon the intellectual and moral character of the people. Indeed, if there's no virtue among us, James Madison declared, quote, we are in a wretched situation. No theoretical checks, no form of government can render us secure. The importance of character in public life is especially important now, given that our polarized politics make it even harder to find common ground across our differences. We need the virtues, courage, justice, empathy, humility, to listen to our neighbors and actually listen to them. To engage respectively across differences, to preserve liberty and justice, not just for some, but for all. And I must add, given my research, we need the virtue of hope to resist the politics of presumption and despair. The need for these and other virtues of public life give us distinctly civic reasons to focus on educating character in our schools and our universities. Finally, educating character can advance an institution's mission. This is particularly true for institutions such as St. Paul, MBA, and Wake Forest, whose history and vision include helping students develop their values and their virtues. But our institutions are not exceptions in this way. We look closely at institutions across the world, as a colleague of Oxford has, and seen the mission statements they often proffer. Character in some form, or virtue in some form, is often listed as a key institutional aim and mission. So it's there, even if not always lifted up and celebrated. And for institutions that are explicitly religious, as St. Paul is, this religious identity and tradition can also give you another reason to think about why we might educate character. Most major religious traditions and moral traditions, from Christianity and Confucianism to Buddhism, Judaism, and Islam, among others, See, cultivating virtuous habits, these habits of character, is a central expression of moral and religious commitment. And even if character is not an explicit aim of our institutions, it's often an implicit effect. Educational institutions are not morally neutral. By their very nature, they are formative communities whose values, norms, expectations, and examples always shape the character of their members. And they do this not only through their formal curriculum, what they teach in the classroom or what they talk about, but through the hidden curriculum that, like an iceberg, sunk beneath the water, can pretend unknown dangers and influences. And it can encode values, influences, and incentives that shape how students think, feel, and act in ways we often don't even recognize. So the question is not whether schools educate character, but how. So if we can be aware that character is always being educated, that it's inevitable in our institutions, and it's better to be conscious, critical, and intentional about how we do that well. How it's being formed, for example, to know who is forming it, and toward what ends and purposes is it being formed. These are important questions for us to really grapple with in our own context, be that in a school or perhaps in a corporation or nonprofit. Otherwise, the surrounding culture around us, the one that we swim in all the time, will come in and fill the gap. And that'll be what forms our character in ways we don't even realize it's being formed. So I think these kind of discussions of character can help us all become more self-conscious, more critical and intentional about ways in which we can form character in our own context and how it's already being formed and reformed and sometimes perhaps deformed. So I've offered now 7 reasons that we might think about educating character. It's the right thing to do. It promotes human flourishing. It fosters academic excellence and integrity. It enhances career preparation and advancement. It supports diversity, equity, and inclusion. It makes us better leaders and citizens, and it can advance our institution's missions. Hope some of these reasons perhaps may be convincing to you as we think about why we might have the courage to teach character. But now I want to think in the last half of my remarks on if it is possible and even advisable to do this work, how do we do it well? How do we actually teach character in our own context? For the last few years, colleagues at the Oxford Character Project and I have been working on this very question, trying to research the best methods of character development. Drawing on research across philosophy, religion, sociology, psychology, education, and even neuroscience, we've identified 7 such strategies. So in the spirit of our 7 reasons to teach character, the 7 deadly sins, and perhaps better, the 7 heavenly virtues, I want to offer 7 strategies for character formation. The first is virtue literacy, which involves developing a knowledge and vocabulary of virtue and character. If we know, for example, that what virtue of courage is and what it looks like, if we know how certain vices like cowardice and rashness might oppose it, and which other virtues are needed to support it, such as wisdom, for example, or resilience, then we'd be better able to see situations when that virtue is required, to know how to enact it in that context, and to identify possible obstacles or temptations that might inhibit or prevent our pursuit. I'll tell my students that vision is a precondition of virtue. If we are able to see our situations well and name what we see with our vocabulary, we'll be better able to respond with virtue and care. If we can't see it, we can't respond well. Many of us want to be people who have virtue, but we often don't see situations that require a virtuous and wise response. So we can see and increase virtue literacy in various ways. We can read books or articles about particular virtues, or we can have discussions about character, as we're doing here in this auditorium tonight. But as Aristotle reminds us, the purpose of studying virtue, quote, is not to know what virtue is, but to become good. It's not enough to know what virtue requires if we aren't able and willing to live it. So it requires other strategies besides just knowing what virtue is. The second, and I think one of the most important ones, is habituation through practice. As Aristotle and Maya Angelou emphasize, a virtue is a habit, a kind of moral muscle that we strengthen the more we use it, and the more that we stretch our powers in response to weighty moral matters. It means we learn virtues as we learn other habits and skills through practice. We learn to be courageous or compassionate or just in the way that we learn to play the piano or throw a football, through repetition over and over again until virtuous thoughts, feelings, and actions become almost automatic, part of our second nature. In my class, I encourage students to habituate virtues in various ways, by keeping a gratitude journal, for example, for several weeks, thinking about what they're grateful for, and by creating a plan for character development which is modeled on Benjamin Franklin's ideas of how he formed character in his autobiography. He tried to identify 13 virtues he wanted to develop and had a chart he mapped his progress on each week as he thought about how he might increase those virtues. So my students must choose a virtue they want to strengthen, develop a plan based on our readings to enhance it, apply that plan for 2 weeks, and then reflect on what they learned about themselves. I finished grading these papers last week, and I can attest it's amazing what students learn about themselves, even in only 2 weeks. I mean, these kind of intentional exercises that really focus on their own self-awareness and give them the tools they need to actually apply it and take responsibility for it are just really powerful. Yet if virtue is a habit, it is not a mindless habit, but what one scholar calls an intelligent habit. It requires having good reasons to act, not just acting out of instinct. And also reflecting on those actions to discern what went well, what went wrong, and how can we improve going forward. That's why reflection on our own experiences is a third strategy for fostering and developing character. We learn by doing, and then reflecting on what we did so we can understand and therefore improve our responses. We can, of course, reflect in many different ways through journaling, prayer, meditation, or even conversation like this one. I ask students to complete in my class a character autobiography that helps them focus on the ways in which they've been formed by people around them across their whole life. And also to write reflections each week on different virtues, how they apply those virtues in their own life. These reflections help sort of connect what they're learning each week with how they're living, which is really the key to effective character growth. One aim of this reflection is to help increase awareness of our biases, tendencies, and temptations, which is our fourth strategy for character development. As research has shown over the last few years, our thoughts, feelings, and actions are often affected by unconscious biases and situational influences that can deform or distort our character and behavior, or cause us to act in ways that might be unconscious but still perhaps problematic. As a result, bringing these subterranean influences to the surface, doing some deep diving, can help us challenge, correct, and counteract these subtle influences. Knowing our tendencies and temptations can also help us choose situations wisely and create conditions where we can avoid the worst temptations. Let me give you a really interesting example. Again, another student example. One of my students was trying to cultivate the virtue of temperance. With relation to technology, he knows he has a tendency to do a lot of technology to avoid doing his homework. And what he also knew that he loved to watch TV. And he'd watch TV for hours and wouldn't do his homework, and he'd feel bad about that and not get it done. So in this process of doing this plan, he decided that he would be like Odysseus and tie himself to the mast by putting his TV in his dorm room closet so he wouldn't be seduced by the sirens of Netflix. So you can see the ways in which sort of someone taking knowledge of their own tendencies and actually applying that to sort of create constraints that make them act in ways they actually align with their own goals and aspirations. So we can do this in our own lives in ways that are really interesting. Perhaps not as dramatic as that, but I hope perhaps as effective. A fifth strategy is to use moral reminders, those words, signs, or symbols like those perhaps on this room. They remind us of things that are really important to us, that recall our commitments and make it harder for us to intentionally break or violate them, creating barriers for us to self-justification or rationalization of our behaviors. It's easy to rationalize our behaviors if we aren't reminded of who we committed to be. We might, for example, wear a bracelet that reminds us to be grateful every day, or sign an honor code that recalls our commitment to act with honor and integrity before a test. And research shows this is very effective, actually, for helping prevent cheating on tests. We might memorize a poem, or quote, or verse that we can call on to bolster our resilience when we're tempted to give up. As I did when running a marathon a few years ago when my legs needed reminders every other step that I should keep going. Or we might wear a wedding ring, for example, that reminds us of our commitment to our spouse and also discourages others who might see it from tempting us to violate our vows. So various ways in which these reminders might help us sort of keep us on the straight and narrow as we think about how we want to grow and maintain our character. The importance of fidelity, mentioned last there, points to a sixth strategy, friendships of mutual support and accountability. We all know the power of peer pressure, especially on young people who research shows are especially sensitive to the rewards and perhaps harms of social engagement. They're very attuned, their minds are very attuned, research shows, to how they are approved or rejected by their peers. So it's important for them and also for us to choose our friends wisely. to be surrounded by people of good character who shall call forth our best selves. That's why Aristotle, for example, encourages us to develop friendships not just based on utility or pleasure, not just our people we have fun with or find useful in some way. Because when those friendships aren't pleasurable or useful anymore, they dissolve. Those friends are really kind of friends for a certain reason. But friendships of virtue, he argues, are more enduring because friends share common values and virtues, and they care about their friend not for what that friend will give to them, but for the friend's own sake. That's what a friendship of virtue really is for Aristotle. And these kinds of friendships of virtue are vital for our character development. Not only do such friends provide a positive influence on us, but they also support us in times of need. Maybe even vacuum in the hall when you might need them. They help us by giving us opportunities to practice virtue in relation to them or become more aware of our limits, and also hold us accountable when we fail to live up to our own ideals. I think such accountability especially is important for many of us. Really have a hard time with accountability. Our culture doesn't do a very good job with encouraging it, and I think young people often feel very scared of it. But what I tell them in my class is that accountability is not a threat to true friendship, but an expression of it. We often don't sort of say or do that enough. Friends can also serve as positive role models for us, which points to our final strategy: engagement with exemplars, those moral role models who embody certain virtues of character in how they live every day. We learn character as we learn other things, in part through imitation. Neuroscience tells us that we have mirror neurons in our minds where we actually mirror the behavior and attitudes of those around us in ways we don't even recognize. And so it's important for us to be surrounded by people we might mirror well. These exemplars can provide a model to emulate and to imitate for us. They can expand our moral imagination and help us see virtue in different ways. They can inspire feelings of what's called elevation that inspire us to be better ourselves. They elevate our own consciousness in ways that want to motivate us to be better people. And they offer us valuable advice, even when they are not present. Asking, what will my exemplar do, for example, can help us think about what we do in a very complex situation. In fact, research shows that people often prefer to think about their exemplar than to follow a rule or principle. They'll find it more helpful to think about what their exemplar, their role model, might do in that situation. That's why many traditions, such as Christianity and Confucianism, put exemplars at the center of their ethics. We can engage exemplars in various ways, reading stories and books about them, watching films that highlight key moments in their lives, or viewing or creating art that might reveal their character. These exemplars might include famous figures from history, those listed on the top of the ceiling, perhaps outside the hallway, like Nelson Mandela, for example, or Gandhi, or Harriet Tubman. Or they can be fictional characters, such as John Keating in Dead Poets Society. We all know that film here, based on an exemplar here at NBA a few years ago. These people might also be people in our own lives that we see every day. Parents, siblings, friends, teachers, coaches, colleagues. In fact, research shows that the most impactful exemplars are not extraordinary heroes from history, but ordinary exemplars who are relevant and attainable to us in some way. In fact, the example of extraordinary heroes can often be disempowering. They seem so good, I can never be like them. Right? It can actually demotivate us to achieve their example. But ordinary exemplars are those who actually share some experience or identity with us, or perhaps are just a few steps ahead of us. It gives a pathway to follow to be more like them. They can give us both the pathway and also the confidence that we can actually be better. What this shows us about exemplars is that all of us are always being exemplars, whether we realize it or not. Modeling human behavior, modeling virtue of vices is what human beings do. And that's part of what we think about when we think about why character matters. The question is, are we modeling virtue or vice in our lives every day? And I'll conclude by asking you all to think about maybe one virtue you might want to strengthen or model, perhaps in the days ahead. Is it courage, compassion, honesty, or integrity, justice or generosity, humility, or hope, or perhaps some other virtue that's relevant to you? And which strategy might you use, perhaps, to develop that virtue? What kind of exemplar do you want to be? These more personal questions are perhaps the most important reason it takes courage to teach character. It requires us to do the difficult work of character formation ourselves. In his book, The Courage to Teach, Parker Palmer argues that, quote, good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. Good teaching comes from the identity and integrity of the teacher. To teach well, we must not only rely on the contours of our curriculum, but on the content of our character. And believe me, as I know over the last few years, it takes a lot of courage to look into the depths of our hearts, to recognize our limits and see our shadows and face what we see there with courage and honesty. This inner work is messy, it's risky, it's vulnerable, involving grief as much as gladness, sadness as much as strength. So it takes tremendous courage, not only to do this internal work, but to create conditions for it in a culture that lionizes external success and sees busyness as a marker of our status. It's hard to separate that kind of internal work from this culture that so feeds on the external, the achievement-focused work we all do. But when our souls embrace the call to character and create conditions to nurture it, we can discover a source of liberation for ourselves and for all those who our example may very well influence. St. Augustine of Hippo knew this ancient truth well. In On Christian Teaching, he urges the teacher to, quote, live in such a way that he not only gains a reward for himself, but also gives an example to others. So his way of life becomes, in a sense, an abundant source of eloquence. This former professor of rhetoric, probably familiar with these words on the wall here about what rhetoric means, says that how we live, especially in difficult times, can be more eloquent and persuasive than what we say. Quote, bad times, hard times, that's what people keep saying, but let us live well, and times shall be good. We are the times. Such as we are, such are the times. Or as it says elsewhere, quote, you're hoping for the good. Be what you hope for. Today, as we confront our own difficult times, we also have the power to shape them. As we consider how to educate character, may we all have the courage to teach and be what we hope for. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for those wonderful thoughts on behalf of St. Paul. It is a real privilege to have you here, and it's a real excitement for me because the three academic institutions that were most formative of my character were both MBA as a student and as a teacher, administrator, as an undergrad at Wake Forest, and now at St. Paul. So it's a real treat. We got the triumvirate here. But we could not be circling around, and you couldn't, I think, reinforce the institutions and the goals of the institutions more. And as a community, as we think into the next generation, there's no greater topic. So glad that you all are here. And there's a description that C.S. Lewis has of the people of his generation, the young men and women, that describes them as men and women without chests. That they had the tools to function, to be highly functional, but didn't have the inner fortitude. And so as institutions that seek to cultivate that, I'm going to pose the first question, which is, what in your studies have you found to be the greatest virtue, and why, for you personally? And while you reflect on that, you all can come up and pose questions yourselves. We'll just have cues in front of the microphones. We'll have three rules, the three B's. Be brief, be civil, and be a question. And we will go ahead and have that right after this, but we'd love for you to reflect on that. So thanks.
Well, thanks, Will, so much. I think I spent the most time in my life thinking about the virtue of hope. It was the topic of my dissertation in graduate school. It became a book that Sam mentioned earlier. I think hope's a topic we often hear a lot about, but often don't understand as a virtue very often. We hear about hope, but it's often a feeling or a mood or an attitude for us. We might feel hopeful, but it's very actually rare to think about hope as a virtue, as actually a habit we have to cultivate and habituate over time. It has to be developed in ways that order it to the right objects in the right ways, and also avoids vices that might oppose or challenge it. So the tradition says there are two vices that might challenge hope. One is the vice of despair, when we actually lack hope. That's pretty obvious. When we lack hope, we might feel real despair about the world. There's also a different vice, a vice of excess. It's presumption or false hope. We hope for things too much, for example, that aren't possible. Or hope for the wrong things, for example, that might not be good to hope for. And we often forget that hope can actually be sort of shift in these different ways that might make us sort of unsteady in our resolve. And so I think the virtue of hope is one I've spent a lot of time thinking about, given my study of Augustine, for example, and Aquinas, and the ways in which that virtue requires us to do a lot of hard work ourselves to make sure we're having the right kinds of hope. Not just feeling hope about random things, not just feeling sort of excited at times and then sort of pulling back, but how do you have sort of steady, steadfast hope for the right things? That takes practice. And I think that's a really important virtue for our times, given what we see that might cause us to feel despair. Great. I love other questions. This would be great. Yes.
If I might be courageous enough to ask the first question from the crowd, hopefully there'll be others. My name is Ranjit Gupta, and I have a question based upon the Greek word charesin, which is the word for character, and it means engraving.
Yes.
So you have the engraving of stone or in an auditorium, and character tends to be something which is caused, it may be a habit, something you put on, but it's quite terrestrial and mundane. Do you think there's a danger in the word or the study of character to be very anthropocentric, to be very human, and to be very much about works as opposed to grace? I think one of the great joys I have is knowing that as a follower of Jesus, despite all my failings, I follow a God who's forgiven me and gives me the grace to perhaps have my character improved. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I love that question. In fact, I had it a line in my talk about the origins of the word character in Greek, so you kind of gave me another way to talk about it. Actually, the word, as he mentioned, it refers to the imprint or mark, often on a coin. So how you're imprinted is your kind of a sign of your characters. How are we imprinted? How are we marked by our world? I think in our current world, I think it's pretty good currency to have character be what we are sharing in that way. As far as the question you really asked is about sort of relation between sort of character as a matter of human endeavor and one of divine grace. And this has been a topic of deep discussion for many theologians across the ages, from Augustine, who I study, as well as Aquinas, for example. And I think in our current world, we have a tendency to sort of want to bifurcate grace and human agency in separate ways. See, it must be either or. And what I really love about both Augustine and Aquinas, both, is they actually recognize that grace can often work through very human endeavors. In fact, Augustine has a great line from the very introduction of On Christian Teaching that those who claim to read the Bible only through grace, still learn the alphabet from a human teacher, right? That we still need human teachers to actually help us nurture our own character in ways that respond to perhaps things we might see as acts of grace. Moreover, he says that we also need certain kind of virtues that we can habituate through ordinary exemplars. So, for example, in the Confessions, his famous text where he kind of talks about his own formation toward God through grace, he also lifts up his mother Monica as a real exemplar of virtue for him. Monica was not learned in ancient Rome, but she was the one who lifted up sort of certain virtues like faith and hope and love for him. And his friend Alypius, for example, another friend of his. He also thought that, we can learn a lot, for example, from imitating Christ as our exemplar. Augustine was a very deeply Christological thinker as a bishop in Hippo. But he also said, but we also might want to look at the saints, because the saints aren't perfect. In fact, they're human. And Christ, he says, might actually be even too far away from us, too perfect. We might be better off looking at the saints as a way to think about how we can do this in a very human body and a very human soul. So I think so that's what he's saying, that there are actually ways to cultivate character, even if you accept Augustine's view of grace, through very human endeavors. Aquinas is a bit more complex on this. I'll just say a bit of word about Aquinas. In fact, he thinks that we all can acquire certain virtues through habituation and practice, and virtues such as courage, justice, wisdom. But he also says that there are certain virtues that even those virtues can be infused by grace. So we can't necessarily sort of limit God from actually infusing in us virtues that we might not actually cultivate ourselves, but they can be cultivated. So there are ways that grace can often work in very, in ways that sort of complicate and unsettle the kind of neat binaries we have today about grace and agency. I think there's ways in which grace and agency might be much more complexly interwoven than some of our discourse often allows. Thanks.
I'm Donald Drake. I'm a pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church across the street here, and there's a line in the Bible that says everyone does what is right in his or her own eyes, and we live in a time of multiple truths. So is there a litmus test for character for a country?
For a country. Well, I think, there have been several that have been sort of put forward, especially, think about the New Testament, for example, which you mentioned. One of those is Matthew 25, which is called the Judgment of the Nations passage, where how nations are judged, and it's where they're judged not by those who necessarily proclaim their faith, but actually help the least of these, who help the poor, who visit the stranger and the prisoner and the orphan, and who really sort of make a commitment to living out love in very practical ways. So I think that's one. You might get that one standard from the Bible. I think we also hear from the Bible that in addition to sort of seeing things through our own eyes, we also can sometimes have a plank in our own eyes that calls us actually not to be able to see ourselves or others with true humility or accuracy. So I think it's easy for us also to forget that we need to be aware of our own plank in our eyes and how we might be limited in our vision by our own sort of experience. So I think there are ways in which that also might caution us from being too presumptuous about what we know when we might be also limited in that. How do we sort of reach out with humility and love to our neighbors in ways that help to learn from them, not just sort of to judge them or to dismiss them or exclude them from that. So I think in some ways, I think that gives us kind of a way to think about humility being a very important virtue. There's a sermon Augustine gave once that asked him what's the most important three virtues. He said humility, humility, humility. Right? And I think if you don't have humility, you won't be open to learning from other people, right? Or recognizing the ways in which you need to grow. And so I think humility is very important for this world. And I think in a culture we live in right now where achievement is prioritized often, where success, where you want to show your accomplishments on Instagram, right? You want to show what you've achieved on your CV, where the key virtues are what David Brooks calls resume virtues, not eulogy virtues. I think if we had more attention to humility and what we might not know, we might be a bit better at being worthy of being judged.
Thank you. Very wonderful talk. I'm engaged in a project, a grand project to create a new school, a medical school, that's committed in part, right, in its mission to form diverse leaders of character. Mm-hmm. And we're asking some of these questions. I'm going to get pretty practical on you, but what have you learned about assessing character? We can't put it in the curriculum if we don't have a plan for assessment. Tell us a little bit about lessons you've learned in assessing character development in students, both undergraduate or postgraduate. Yeah,
it's a great question and very vexing one often. How do you measure something like character, which seems so intangible, right? And thanks for your question. We actually do a lot of work in our medical school at Wake Forest to integrate character. We have a whole set of coaches that meet every medical student to help them develop a character and purpose plan when they enter medical school to be people of character across the 3 years there and beyond. And so it's very important to us in that way. We think about two kinds of assessment that we think about often. One is assessment you might do in a class to see whether people are learning or not. So when I give a test or have them write a paper, I'm trying to see how are they taking this material we've been teaching them and applying it or learning it. And that's one form of assessment. And I've been really encouraged by that. Today, I left my class early today to get here for this talk, but it's our final week in class. And the class I teach is called Commencing Character, and it pairs ancient theories of character from Aristotle and others with contemporary commencement speeches on different virtues, about 40 speeches on everything from justice and courage to compassion and kindness and love and friendship. And the very final assignment for students to give their own commencement speech about their vision of a good life, And today I got to hear 4 speeches today from students. And I'm not a crier. I'm a philosopher, right? I don't cry very often. And these students brought me to tears today because of what they had shown. They learned about character from this class. and from their own real hard inner work to apply the lessons in ways that were really resonant with them. They were authentic to who they were. So it wasn't just resuscitating some knowledge about it, Aristotle. They actually were trying to take what they learned and apply it to their own lives. And so I think that gives me the real confidence that we can assess this if we're creative about it in the classroom. The second kind of assessment is more about measurement. How do you measure character growth and see if people actually change across time? And there have been a lot of tools developed in the last sort of couple decades, from psychology especially, that are focused on measuring certain virtues or character overall. And so we use these tools in our program. We have a battery of scales on different character virtues and traits that have been sort of validated by psychologists to measure character growth. And so we often will administer a survey before class and then one afterward. And we also have a control group of students who are not in the class. So we can both see kind of how they grow in the class, but also, is everybody growing this way or not? How is it different? And so that's been really helpful for us at sort of measuring character. So we've published articles, for example, on the course I teach, Commencing Character, that showed that the course compared to control groups has an impact on 7 targeted virtues in significant ways, which is pretty astonishing given it's only a 16-week course. That's a lot of growth because character is slow to develop. And so that's been pretty important for us. We've also shown that their sense of purpose has grown and become not just about their own self-purpose, but about beyond the self-purpose. And we've also developed a scale, the moral exemplar scale, to see how students actually engage their exemplars. What do they find helpful about exemplars? And so we're trying to now test that scale to share it with a wider audience. So I think there are ways to do it. It's complicated. And I've learned a lot because I'm not a psychologist. I'm a philosopher. And so, but I do think there are ways to do it that show us that something's happening. We can't pinpoint exactly where it's happening or what exactly happened, but something's happening that these students are really changing. And I'll add a note on that. We found that some of the qualitative work we do, where we're interviewing students or having them respond to the reflection essays, is often the most revealing because they're actually showing you what they think they've learned and what they have learned. And that's very powerful for us. And so I think that kind of work can often be done whether you have complicated scales or not. That kind of qualitative work can really help show why this matters. Thanks.
Michael, Clay Salter, also a pastor by Donovan, and teach moral leadership at Vanderbilt. Recently heard a colleague in a forum on the Middle East say something, and I'm not going to get the quote wrong, but we find ourselves globally in a place where it's really hard to elect a leader or president who is not corrupt. And the flip side of that is that people who do have character and seem to get a lot of what you're talking about tonight, at least in our country, do not run. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great, vexing question, Clay. Thank you for that. I think maybe time to go. Time to go. Well, Plato said that the punishment for the just person who does not rule is to be ruled by lesser people. And so I think there's a real insight in that now. And I think that means that what does it mean for us to step up to lead? And that means not only as people who run for office, we need those, but also it's easy for us to sort of scapegoat our politicians for their bad character, the bad decisions, but we elect them, right? And so we have to take responsibility ourselves. Who are we electing? Are we actually doing the work to actually elect the right people? Are we actually holding them accountable in ways that we should? Are we letting certain sound bites pass as sort of truth? So I think what I would say is that what I realized in my own vocational journey was I thought about politics for a long time as well and had been encouraged by that and had worked in politics and learned a lot. And there were some really good people in politics. I do think that not all politicians are corrupted. They just often aren't given the stage or the support because others who might have more funds or resources or support get that stage. So I've seen some really good people in politics and know them very closely and very well and admire them deeply. And I've also seen the ways in which our structures of how funds and fundraising works in politics. I've seen how our constant election cycle, unlike the UK, for example, have a 6-week election cycle. The US has an eternal one, it feels like, where once you win an election, the next thing you're doing is on the phone again asking for money. I've seen the ways in which social media has corrupted our influences there. And even we've seen how foreign countries have been part of that process, right? So I think it's easy for us to kind of identify these challenges, but then not look back within ourselves and say, how are we actually doing this work ourselves? How are we being citizens? How are we educating citizens? How are we educating our children to be responsible consumers of data, to be thoughtful thinkers about how we evaluate candidates? We're also thinking about what's most important to us and how are we actually electing people who represent that, and not being distracted by some of the images or the sound bites that might be sensational, but perhaps not quite as substantive as we might have. So I think that to dodge your question, Clay, I think the answer really is that we have to do the work ourselves.
Thank you for a great talk. My name is Matthew Reese, background in moral psychology, as a master's. A big fan of Christian Miller and Adam Cadlock and their work at
Great.
Course. Currently, I'm wondering a lot as a classical school teacher about education reform and what that looks like to bring character into the classroom. So just a small preface, and then I'll say my question. So high school education has been shaped by a collection of influences. John Dewey, Joseph Lancaster, Horace Mann, many more that have their own value sets. The result has been a particular set of practices in high school. That's the norm. 15-minute class periods, grading based on averaging, amalgamated averages of a single GPA. Ken Robinson talks a lot about these in his book, Graded Schools. And these practices form an environment that undoubtedly shapes the level of autonomy that a student can have, and then the kind of relationship that teachers have with their students. So to what extent do you see that education reform may be required in order to influence and bring character into the classroom in a way that it's maybe currently not able to be brought in?
Yeah, great question. And I'm not an expert on some of the K-12 educational sort of practices or movements, so I wanted to kind of defer on that topic. I think I do think we have to think about what it means to educate, and are the ways we are assessing these things through GPAs and amalgamated sort of grades, is that the most helpful way to assess or not? I think it's really important. So I do think there is some need for new ways to imagine assessment, because it's going to be hard to give people a character grade on a 100-point scale, right? So we want to do this work. How do we find creative ways to assess them in ways that actually honor their growth and not just try to sort of quantify or calculate it? So I think that's a real challenge to this work. I will say that, though, I think the one thing you might say in response to that question is, well, it's going to take a little bigger movement, so can't do nothing about it now. The tides are too strong. There's a lot we can do now, though. So I guess I want to offer some words of encouragement for even those moments where you do have these very sort of structured and conditioned ways of doing education. There are ways, little ways, often to integrate character in different contexts that take micro kind of interventions that I think can be quite helpful for that. I think it's easy for us to think about character only as an individualistic kind of matter of will and not recognize the structural constraints and the incentives and the influences that actually shape us and shape what we think to be good or valuable or a good student. We have to be alert to structural conditions. I think Christian Miller does this very well in his work. He thinks about the ways that certain structures shape our responses in ways we don't even realize. And so we have to get beyond just sort of blaming or claiming that people are good based on their own will and recognize the ways in which their will has also been shaped and formed for decades by ways of schooling, ways of being, ways of looking at media, be it TV or social media. And so I think we need to be much more alert to that work. And I think discussions in moral psychology and social psychology that bring in these kind of social influences are very important for that conversation. So I'm not sure I can answer your question, but I think that's where I would go in trying.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, I have a question. We're all flawed as human beings, and we have plenty of examples of people of high character who make mistakes, make bad decisions, sometimes really bad decisions. A school like MBA has thousands of examples in its past where students make really poor decisions. And so, in the work you're doing, and those of us helping other people learn, and ourselves learn, how do we help people knowing that mistakes are part of character development, learn from our mistakes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm reminded of the quote from Nelson Mandela that a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying. There's some wisdom in that all of us are flawed in ways, and if we, but do we actually keep on trying or not to be better, to be good? There's a lot of work you may know about by Carol Dweck at Stanford on the growth mindset and the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset. And what she's shown in her work is that Those with fixed mindsets should have they have kind of a fixed amount of intelligence or character or skill, and so they assume that, and therefore when they make mistakes or fail, they feel like it's they have less than they thought they did. There's no way to actually grow it. It's kind of a fixed standard, and so it's really hard to come back from something like that. Those who have a growth mindset, she shows through a lot of research, actually kind of see these mistakes not as sort of failures, but as opportunities to grow and to get better and to improve. And so it's been a big movement recently to shift people from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Now, most of that's been focused on academic success and skill. There's now some work being done by psychologists at Alabama on the moral growth mindset. How do we apply this idea of moral growth mindset to help people recognize that part of what it means to be a person of character is to actually make mistakes and then grow from them? If you stop working on it once you realize you made a mistake, then you won't grow in character. And so how do we think about encouraging that really doing this work requires us making some mistakes and then growing from those, learning from those and getting better? And so I do think we have to kind of normalize in some way, without actually encouraging these kind of mistakes. I think one thing that an institution like MBA can do, what we can do at Wake Forest, is see that institutions of education have a job to help students grow, right? If you already knew what you came in for, you wouldn't need to go to 4 years in college or 4 years at MBA, right? And so how do we help recognize our own mandate is to help students grow, which means helping them grow through mistakes and grow through these different iterations of themselves and have the patience and humility and the care to do that well. We found one thing in our program, in our assessments, we found is that one of the most important influences on students' character are actually relationships between their peers and faculty and staff mentors. It's care that offers the conditions for real character growth. And I think in our culture, we often think about providing care. We think about providing curriculum and techniques and activities and programs, but it's really care that's most important. But care takes time, and care takes people, and care is not always recognized, and you can't put it on a CV. I had a great talk with her in the office hours. That's not on the CV, right? Your research is, but probably the most important work I do happens one-on-one in office hours. That's not anywhere on my CV, right? So how do we think about incentivizing the right kinds of care, the right kinds of teaching, the right kinds of work, where this kind of work actually is celebrated and recognized and honored for what it is? And I think that's where we have to kind of really think about the questions of reform, about how we think about our institutions and what is being incentivized, what's not being incentivized, not only for students, but for faculty and staff. So I do think that care really matters a lot. And if we can think of ways in which we can provide caring conditions for people to grow and make mistakes, then that's our best bet.
Thank you, Dr. Lam, for a very good talk as well as thorough and sensitive answers to questions. You were a Rhodes Scholar. My first professor at university was also a Rhodes Scholar. And in his very first lecture to me and my colleagues, he discovered that we knew nothing about the Bible and we knew nothing about the Greek myths. And he thought that the point to begin any education in relation to English literature, which was his subject, was a knowledge of the Bible and a knowledge of the Greek myths. And so he prescribed to us, as our very first assignment, reading certain portions of the Bible and reading 2 volumes of Robert Graves' The Greek Myths. Now, assigning that at a university in India was not only perfectly acceptable at that time, but was regarded as a very good thing to do. Today, in India, that would be slightly less regarded as a good thing to do. And I suggest that there might be a similar change in climate in the United States, perhaps not in institutions like those being mentioned here, but in perhaps even greater and more established institutions. And so my question, Dr. Lam, is the following: how does character education needs to change in order to fit people for a climate that is much more hostile to ethics and to character, where the price for character today is much greater than it would have been 20 years ago or 30 years ago?
Great question. I think the one thing I think we have to think about here is that some people can see pluralism as a threat to character, that these diversities of visions can actually make it harder to teach one vision. In fact, one of the reasons that scholars show that character actually decreased in higher education, at least, was this increasing pluralism of the 20th century, especially. So historically, many colleges and universities actually had a focus on character and ethics. Often the president would teach a capstone course, for example, on ethics for graduating seniors. It was part of their mission in some way. And so that shifted for various reasons in the sort of mid-20th century. One was increasing diversity. These weren't just Christian colleges anymore. They had much more diversity of background, religion, and ideology. Also, there's the rise of research university. That research became a very important pillar of the modern university in ways it wasn't perhaps when it was more teaching focused. Also, the ways in which science sort of gained some sort of traction in being sort of objective in certain ways and therefore value neutral. That became part of the story. Julie Rubin at Harvard has a great book on this called The Marginalization of Morality, about how character in universities changed over the 20th century especially. So I think one reason many people are skeptical of character is they have this vision that it must be done in one way or one tradition to be done sort of well. And what we're doing at Wake Forest and elsewhere is showing that actually there are many different ways to elevate texts and traditions and sources that might help us think about who we are, because our communities are much more diverse now than they used to be. So we each bringing this to our own communities in ways that are really true for who we are and our friends are, our colleagues are. So how do we sort of recognize how it's formed us, and how do we also create some literacy for other traditions, right? If you have friends from a different tradition, how do you begin to learn about their own tradition in ways you didn't maybe recognize before? And so there are ways for us, and opportunities for us to actually see character as a way to sort of not only sort of understand more critically, more deeply our own commitments, our own values, but to really begin to sort of to expand our literacy about other traditions and other cultures in ways that might help us all in this very polarized and plural society understand each other and listen to each other in ways that might help us learn something from those who might have a different point of view. So I think my sense is actually it's an opportunity for us. It is a challenge and also an opportunity for us to think about how we can expand our vision of what character might be, and think about if we can understand the core parts of people's lives, like who they really are. If we had more of that understanding, we would be much more likely to have sort of the kind of unity that we are seeking in our world. So I think character is really a way for us to invite the deeper human story. And I think that in many ways, the character has been sort of seen as kind of a narrative ethic. That we all bring our different stories. We're all characters in our own story. What character will we be? And who will be in the novel with us? And I think now the novels have been in the past, novels might have been much narrower in the characters. I think there's going to be a much sort of wider range of characters in those novels, and they'd be pretty interesting to read. Thank you.
I want to wrap up by first just thanking everybody in the room. Thank you so much for being here, for participating, for your presence. I hope that this conversation just provided some food for thought, and this will prompt further conversations, further thought, further discussion about some of these issues. For a deeper dive into some of these ideas, we would suggest some readings we have available out front, and these are excerpts from Augustine's Confessions, a letter from a Birmingham jail, The Loss of the University, Abraham Lincoln, The Spiritual Growth of a Public Man, and another volume entitled Spirit and Imagination. We also highly suggest that if you haven't done so, you join the Trinity Forum Society. On your chairs, you'll see sort of a document about that. Love for you to sign up. It's a relatively modest expense, and it provides you with lots of different things, including a subscription to our quarterly readings. You'll see examples of those readings out front. Some of what I just mentioned, you'll get those quarterly in the mail. You'll also get a gift membership you can share with other people. You'll also get a daily email, which is a curated email of a handful of stories and articles that will be sent to you each day. And they're very, very insightful and very good. As a special benefit tonight, if you join the Trinity Forum Society this evening, you'll also get what's known as our Christmas collection. And that includes Handel's Messiah, selections from Dickens' Christmas Carol, and G.K. Chesterton's The Strangest Story in the World. So again, we'd encourage you to join the Trinity Forum Society. We'd also suggest that you also support Trinity in other ways. We rely on the benefit of the graciousness of a lot of people in Nashville and Washington, D.C., and throughout the country. And we're so thankful for those supporters, but as every nonprofit, we rely on just generous people for support. If you'd like to know more, get involved, be a host of a future event, please see me, Meg Freeman, who's in the back. Meg, if you could raise your hand. Meg is local to Nashville, but works for Trinity. Tom Walsh, who is somewhere in the room right in the back. If you'd like to know more, please get with one of us. And also, if you've liked tonight's evening, feel free to share it. You will be getting an email in a few days. This is going to be online. We also have on our website, ttf.org. We also have a YouTube page. This will be posted, but there's also years and years and years of content, all of which is free, all of which is available, including all of our past Nashville conversations. But online conversations and other things are available for the taking. So please visit that website. Again, lots of great, great content. Also, mark your calendars. We'll be back in the spring. As I mentioned, we do this twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. It will be May 8th here in the same room with an author and legal scholar, John Inazu. And John's going to be talking about, quote, learning to disagree. Again, challenging topic in May of next year. We'll see if we can follow the 3 B's in our questioning and have a very thoughtful and fruitful discussion in a time that's going to be very challenging. And lastly, let me just go through some thanks. Again, I want to thank our partners. We want to thank William and Will at MBA in St. Paul. We want to thank Jeanette Leggett at St. Paul, who did a ton of work for this event. We want to thank Langhorne Coleman at MBA, who also was instrumental in putting this on. We've had some volunteers tonight: Ellie Roper, Katie Gregory, Lauren Kelly, Richard Freeman, Ashley Lamar, and Amy Richardson. We've also got our photographer you saw roaming around the room, Dayton Gray, our videographer, Barry McAllister, and AV help from Mark Artisan. And lastly, I want to thank some of our Trinity staff. Again, Tom Walsh, our VP of Operations, Meg Freeman, Development and Partnerships Associate, and then Mary Ann Morris, who is here as well in the back, who really did a ton of work to get here tonight. Lastly, I want to thank Michael. I appreciate your comments. Everything you have to say is always insightful. It's always great food for thought, and we really appreciate your making the trip here. And lastly, I want to thank all of you. Again, thank you for being here tonight, and have a great evening.